Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Queer Asia Organizing Committee to the second day of our second annual conference. The conference this year revolves around the questions of desire, decriminalization, and decolonization. With the UK celebrating 50 years of decriminalization of homosexuality this year, and so as celebrating its centenary, we sort of attempted to look back at the history of colonization and its impact on the lives of LGBT queer people in Asia, as well as the fight for decriminalization of same-sex behavior in countries all across the region. This year, we've been able to bring together scholars, activists, artists, filmmakers from across 25 different Asian countries and their diasporas. Today, we have special events on LGBT activism in China, West Asia, Vietnam, India, and Hong Kong, including a partner event with the UCL around a photography exhibition, which is titled Living Disobediently, Around Life Under 377, and a wine reception at UCL, so please do come for that. Our amazing volunteers will be able to guide you to these venues and back. Queer Asia is a network of queer identifying scholars, academics, activists, and artists and performers strives to create a global platform for inter-Asia collaboration, dialogue, and research that is freely accessible to all. We hope to build a sustainable and independent platform and request you to please consider donating at any of the registration desks if you enjoyed our events. Without further ado, I would like to request you to join me in welcoming our panelists on the first panel for the day. We are joined by Maizi, who is a feminist activist from China and was also one of the feminist 5 activists who was detained by the Chinese police on the eve of Women's Day in 2015 for trying to do a protest in public on domestic violence in China. Arvind Narayan, who is the Geneva director of ARC International, an organization that works primarily with the UN and international policy and human rights mechanisms on LGBT rights. He was also part of the team which fought the famous Nas judgment, which decriminalized same-sex behavior in 2009. Yasmin Purba, who is an Indonesian human rights lawyer and has been working in the field of human rights, justice, and development for more than 14 years. She is currently an expert member of Arus Pilangi, a prominent civil society organization focusing on advocacy of human rights of LGBTQ communities in Indonesia. And we have Paul Dillane, who is the executive director of Kaleidoscope Trust, a leading NGO working to advocate for human rights and inclusion of LGBT people internationally. Paul is also a leading expert on the protection of LGBT refugees and was the executive director of UK Lesbian and Gay Immigration Group, a London-based NGO working to provide practical support to LGBT people fleeing persecution between 2014 to 17. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. So how we have made this panel is that I will just throw an opening question to all of our panelists and let them respond and then take it on from there. So I think we'll just keep it very broad, and I would like all of you to respond to what does criminalization mean to you in the context of your activism for LGBTQ rights in your region? Arvind, would you like to start?
In this presentation, I'll focus a little more closely on the Indian context and the example of what happened in India. And when you talk about criminalization, the story in a sense begins back in Britain when Lord Macaulay drafted what is called the Indian Penal Code. The Indian Penal Code has a provision, 377, which talks about carnal intercourse against the order of nature, which is the provision which criminalizes same-sex relationships, same-sex sex in the Indian context. Why it is important is this law became the template for the law which traveled literally on the backs of empire throughout the British Commonwealth. So we have this law in all parts of the British Commonwealth, and I think that's the issue which Paul will focus a little more strongly on. But to get back to the Indian context, that is the criminal law. What does it mean? There are several aspects to it. Firstly is the entire question of prosecution under the law, where there are cases filed against individuals who commit these particular acts. The range of cases I can talk about, but we don't have the time for that. But the underlying question of prosecution is what we would call the question of persecution, which is the fact that the police use the fear of the law to extort, to abuse, and to criminalize LGBT persons. And underlying that is the social prejudice the law sets in place. So the impact of the law is at one level very direct, another level more indirect and more diffuse, and travels through society as it were. So when you're talking about changing the law, it's really not only about removing the legal provision. Our battle is to change people's mindsets and ways of thinking around issues of gender and sexuality. And that is the battle we have before us. And I think that is what unites struggles around the world. When you say the struggle for decriminalization, it's really a struggle for the right to dignity and the right to expression of LGBT people. It's not just removing a criminal law or a provision of the law. It's much deeper and much wider than that. The Indian context has two specificities which I want to bring to your attention. That is, the law came in 1860. If you'd asked me in 2000, 2001, will the law go in your lifetime? I would have said not in my lifetime. But actually it did. In 2009, we had a judgment of the Delhi High Court which decriminalized LGBT lives. And the important point of the judgment, I'll just make it as brief as possible, is even when we talk about the issues of gender and sexuality, the best response you might receive from sometimes sympathetic people is what you do in the privacy of your bedroom is your business. And that, again, originated in Britain, where the Wolfenden Committee came up with this famous line, which says, there's an area of private immorality which is not the law's business. What the Delhi High Court judgment did is take that one step further. They said your sexuality is something that travels with you wherever you go. So the point they're making is there's an expressive component to who you are. There's a link between intimate acts you may perform and your sense of dignity and selfhood. So in a sense, when we talk about your right, you talk about the question of decriminalization, you're talking about decriminalizing the right to live with dignity. It's a deeper expression than just the notion of what sex acts you may perform in the privacy of your bedroom. We're talking about an expressive component to who you are. And that is what we're claiming should be the decriminalization aspect, and that's what the Delhi High Court did. There's many more aspects to that which we don't have time to go into. I'll just conclude with maybe the question that the judge who formulated the Delhi High Court judgment, he described it later as he said this was about the right to love. And my simple formulation, I don't know if you guys will agree with me, that all good love stories come to an end. And in 2013, the Supreme Court recriminalized LGBTI lives. And the current scenario is we're living once again under the shadow of this particular law. The law, again, the recriminalization was based on two aspects. One is the judges ignored the fact that LGBT people are people. They made the point that these are sexual acts which are criminalized. And we think of LGBT people only within the register of sexual acts, so nothing more than the sexual acts they may perform, and therefore they did not go down the road of decriminalizing. The second aspect which they said is they let Parliament decide. Again, this is an issue worth thinking about, because when you say let Parliament decide, what in effect you're saying is let majority opinion prevail. And our submission has always been that the role of the judiciary has to be a counter-majoritarian institution, which means that the role of the judiciary is to protect the rights of unpopular minorities. Again, that might have a certain kind of a similarity to in terms of the context, where it's very difficult to move against a majoritarian public opinion, be it in Indonesia, be it in many other parts of the British Commonwealth. Aapurv, if you don't have any further time, I'll stop with that for now.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Aapurv. I think when we're talking about Indonesia has a different experience with India. We are not, we're Dutch colonized country where we used to be a Dutch colonized. We're not, so we don't have that Article 377 like most of British ex-colonial countries have. We are currently, we don't, at the national level, homosexuality is not a punishable act. It's not a crime. It was only in 2015 that the Aceh province imposed a new Sharia law that criminalized homosexuality and casual sex conduct. So our focus, our advocacy focus in Indonesia is not to decriminalize, but to fight the effort to criminalize LGBT. Currently, there's a strong support, there's a strong demand in the public to criminalize homosexuality, homosexual conducts, also casual sex conducts, and which is very unfortunate for us, because before 2016, where there was a huge moral panics happening in Indonesia in 2016, because there's a belief among the publics that the propaganda of because LGBT movement is started to get attention and more visible, and so there's a panic among publics that there's a systematic propaganda of LGBT, there's a systematic LGBT propaganda to influence young people to become LGBT. And it really scares out parents and families. So supports on criminalizing LGBT started to gain, supports. So while before that we were not, before 2016, the main focus of LGBT rights advocacy is we didn't think about criminalization. We were focusing on legal protection, on aiming for legal protection for LGBT, to protect the dignity and rights of LGBT, and as well as including by criminalizing hate crimes, because in Indonesia we don't have hate crimes is not a crime there. We don't have hate crimes in our law. So, but now we move backwards from demanding protection for LGBT people, from demanding demanding the criminalization of hate crimes to stop anti-LGBT movement, to now to basically asking the people not to criminalize us. It's like a 10 steps backwards. So currently there was an ongoing deliberation at the parliament to expand the definition of adultery to include LGBT and homosexuals conducts and cohabitation. And there's also an ongoing case on Constitutional Court to criminalize, basically it's the same thing, to expand the definition of adultery. And it is something new for activists, LGBT activists in Indonesia, because that if the parliament decides to adopt the new provision, then it would really harm our work. It's going to be hard for us to campaign. We will go back to focusing just on creating safe space, I guess. From advocacy to go back on to cave in and just focusing on safe space, because that is what we are doing now. We're focusing on creating safe space and a bit laying low on advocacy work. So and the criminalization is not happening now. I cannot imagine when it happens. So I guess that's very much the general context of Indonesia. Thank you, Aapurv.
Okay, well, I think when we're talking about colonization is really a tough question for a Chinese. Yeah, I was thinking about that. And also we live in a quite isolated country, and we have the Great Firewall. This it's not only you can't see something, we can't see something abroad. It's also about you can't, as a foreigner, you can't search our official websites. You need to use the VPN to cross the firewall, and then we totally have a different language, so you need to use the Google translation to make a better understand about the Chinese context. So the first perspective from the legal situation, the sodomy or the hooliganism, the crime has been eliminated since 1990s. So there's no such thing about criminalization of LGBT community. But there's a popular view that the Chinese are very cultural acceptance to LGBT communities. Actually, the fact is, if I'm gay, there's nothing to deal with others' families. It's none of my business, so I don't have to care about that. So if my children or daughter are gays, though it's forbidden, it's impossible. So it is like that. Our regime makes people don't care about others' human rights. So this sort of cultural acceptance full of unpredictable factors. And for example, maybe 1 month ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, the P-Flag China, they have a lot of parents and their daughter or their sons are gay people, so they do a blend mate for their children's in a very famous corner, a blend mate corner. And there's a lot of heterosexual parents, their children are heterosexual, so it's very popular. And when the P-Flag parents hold the banners and come to do the blend mate, also, this activity is supported by a lesbian app, Rela, and the Rela has been blocked by the internet department. And so the P-Flag also, they evicted they treat their like a peaceful assembly, so they evicted those parents. So when we say cultural acceptance or there's no any legislative articles to anti-gay, but actually, if you want to do something under this background, it's very hard. In the past, I thought, okay, we don't do the street campaigns, we don't hold the rainbow flag on the street, it's okay. But now it turned out it's very casually selective law enforcement, so including LGBT community. Actually, in the authority eyes, they don't have a clear definition about what is LGBT. They can't speak it clearly. They don't know how to pronounce it. But they are trying to learn what is LGBT. In the general public eyes, what the word they know is homosexuality. They use this word a lot. So when we talk about this, except for Rela, there's another gay app named is Thank, also got blocked by the authority. Though those are business companies, so they don't have any power to fight against, because they have investors and they don't have they are not like NGOs, so they can't use the fight way. So they lobby with the official department, and it doesn't work. Now Rela, they put their server overseas. Can you believe it? You need to cross the firewall to use Rela now. So the things is very tricky now, and I think if we take a look at the legislation, we can find some articles which are anti-gays, like the sex workers. If you money boys, you know, our authority didn't admit the existence of LGBT community, but they have the articles about sex workers. So if you are a money boy, it's illegal. You are going to be punished, even though it's men have sex with men. It's illegal. You are going to be fined a large number, or put you into prison. Yeah. So we do have some negative articles, but we don't have any positive articles to support LGBT rights. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Paul Dillane. Let me start by thanking all of you for joining us this morning, especially so early on the hottest day of the year. Shows real dedication for LGBT and human rights. And thanks to Queer Asia. I'm a big fan of Queer Asia. Kaleidoscope Trust has been tweeting for months telling people to come, and we're already looking forward to Queer Asia 2018 after the organising team have had a bit of a break this weekend. It's a real privilege to be with you. My area of work is always focused on two distinct but related areas: the protection of refugees, particularly in this country and in this region in Europe, and the defence of LGBT rights. And the intersection between the two, the protection of people fleeing persecution, human rights abuses on account of their sexual orientation and gender identity. I started my career as a very lowly paid and not very well qualified paralegal in South Wales, where I spent a lot of time making coffee and paginating bundles for the law students in the room. That's something to look forward to. But being the only gay in the office, my supervisor very quickly allocated cases to me relating to LGBT people fleeing persecution. I thought that I knew a fair bit about LGBT rights around the world. I knew lots of countries still criminalise same-sex acts. But like a lot of people in the UK, still to this day, I wasn't fully apprised of Britain's colonial legacy. They don't teach us it in school. We don't learn about it so much in the newspapers or on television. And if we do talk about it, it's the good things that Britain wants to talk about: exporting democracy or the rule of law, the common law system. But what we don't talk about is our torrid past in exporting anti-gay laws to all regions of the world. It's important to remember that the trajectory of decriminalisation is heading downwards. The number of countries that are criminalising same-sex acts is decreasing. Last year it decreased to 72, and of course it's still shocking that 72 countries around the world continue to criminalise same-sex relations. But we have seen important progress in countries like Seychelles, which had a targeted decriminalisation, Mozambique, which decriminalised as part of a wider package of reforms, and most recently Caleb Orozco's landmark case in Belize, a multi-year case that Caleb led, leading to decriminalisation in that country. It's also important that we take an intersectional perspective when we're looking at criminalisation. It's often forgotten that at least 45 countries specifically criminalise same-sex acts between women. And we also have to think about the effects of criminalisation on other minorities, the consequences it has for trans people and trans communities. Of course, in specific countries, there are specific laws that criminalise and discriminate against trans people. And of course, the most shocking statistic that in 2017, 8 member states at the UN continue to allow or enforce the death penalty for homosexuality. The Commonwealth is a complex institution. The Kaleidoscope Trust is part of a wide network, a diverse network of 38 organisations in 36 countries called the Commonwealth Equality Network that is working to promote inclusion, equality and human rights for LGBTI people in the Commonwealth. But that posits a question. Given that the Commonwealth is itself a colonial institution, is it ethical for LGBT activists, including in this country, to engage with that institution? And what are the types of strategies that we might utilise when we do engage? And that's something that we'll come on to in a couple of minutes. But of course, the Commonwealth is, as an institution, deeply homophobic. 36 of the 52 member states criminalise same-sex acts. And as an institution that operates by consensus, the possibility of reform is challenging, but there are entry points that I would talk about. I've seen through my work with refugees in law, in my career at Amnesty International as the director of UK LGIG, firsthand the terrible consequences that criminalisation wreaks on the lives of LGBT people. From those who are arrested by the police and prosecuted, but of course the culture of impunity it creates in countries. For instance, like Sri Lanka, where the law, for instance, could be described as dead law, where prosecutions are very rare if they happen at all. But of course, what message does it send to communities when a country criminalises but still doesn't use that law? Would a prospective employer be willing to give you a job, knowing that that law is on the books? It allows for mob violence. It allows for injustices and abuses within the private sphere. But even in countries that criminalise, there are prospects for reform. So in the last few years, Botswana, Seychelles, Samoa and St. Lucia have all legislated for or made provision with employment law for anti-discrimination measures for LGBT people, even though they allow criminalisation. In Jamaica, the Ministry of Education has launched anti-bullying campaigns to try to tackle rampant violence against LGBT people. Malta has recently been declared the most progressive and inclusive country in Europe on LGBT issues for its specific protection of trans and, most importantly, intersex people, leading the way in both the Commonwealth and globally. And in countries like Fiji and Malta, gender identity provisions are provided within constitutional protections. Part of our work at the Kaleidoscope Trust is mobilising support in this country and in LGBT communities for activists who are struggling for equality and inclusion in other countries. And one of the major challenges we face, as I say, is the lack of understanding and an awareness about the global context, about the fact that so many countries criminalise, and specifically about Britain's colonial past. But also to urge and to help the British government and others to understand what entry points exist and what strategies might be appropriate and ethical in trying to promote LGBT rights. Now, I personally have a big problem with the British government describing itself as a leader, and it does describe itself as a leader on LGBT rights, because I've seen firsthand LGBT asylum seekers fleeing persecution being arrested and indefinitely detained in British immigration detention centres, even though seeking asylum is not a crime and is a fundamental human right. I've seen LGBT asylum seekers who've been rejected, whose refugee claims have been rejected in the face of overwhelming evidence because they failed to prove their sexual orientation and gender identity. But I would still urge, and the Kaleidoscope Trust does still urge, with our partners, with parliamentarians and with others, the British government to think proactively about how it can contribute to this situation, both diplomatically, through multilateral institutions like the UN, like the recently formed Equal Rights Coalition, but by providing resources. It cannot be the case that the British government, from where these anti-gay laws originate, can describe itself as a global leader on LGBT rights, but is making such an insufficient contribution to the global LGBT activism movement. Over the last 2 years, the British government has allocated £1.5 million to organisations. That's a good start, but is nowhere near enough to be resourcing the activists that we work with. For instance, the Commonwealth Equality Network, whose resources are so few and far between in the face of this struggle. So I think I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, all of you. I think the follow-up question from here could be about the strategies that you have been using to fight criminalization of whatever form in your country. So yeah, good start.
Yeah, to continue the love story. At present, we live under the criminal law regime of 377, but we've had a remarkable order from the Supreme Court, which is very, very rare, and something referred to as a curative petition. They've agreed to rehear the petition before a bench of five judges. So at present, at a specific legal sense, there's a kind of postponement, as it were, where we know that the matter will be heard again, and the hope, of course, is when it's heard again, the law will be struck down, and that's the specific legal context of it. Maybe I'll just take up on one other point on the colonization question, which Paul referred to, and in terms of what the UK or what Britain can do. And one of the, again, if you look at the legacy of the law, Paul has described it very well in terms of the impact it's had on people's lives. Clearly, one of the ideas is, how do you change people's mindsets around the issue? How, in a sense, to begin a conversation on issues of gender and sexuality in societies where it might be very difficult to talk about these issues. And that's where I think Britain can play a very positive role. The positive role in terms of acknowledging its complicity in the spread of this particular law around the world. If you take the British context, within Britain itself, the fact that a similar law existed, you had a pardon given to Alan Turing. You had a pardon in terms of a range of people who have been prosecuted under this law. The question which I have is, why does not Britain apologize for spreading this law around the world? Again, my point of an apology is not about a gesture to the past, but actually as a gesture to the future. Because an apology will mean you take the ground out from under the legitimacy of this law as far as activism in countries around the British Commonwealth are concerned. Activists from Jamaica to Trinidad to India to Sri Lanka, all of whom can now say that why are we defending this law? Britain has apologized for this law. They're saying we're sorry we put this law forward. We put it forward before the time of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We didn't know what human rights was then. We're sorry for dumping this law on you. And it's our mistake. You say that to our governments. What are our governments going to say? Are they then going to say that, yes, we own this law? They could. That's one the possibility we need to acknowledge. But the other possibility might be, you strengthen the hands of activists in domestic context enormously. So I think beyond the question of financial assistance is the question of an apology, which has to come from the highest levels of the UK government. So the one thing you guys can do, it is push the British government to apologize for this particular law, which is around the world, 72 countries, as Paul mentioned. Maybe the last point I'll make, and I'll conclude with that, is I think we also live in a certain difficult context or scenario. And often there's a sense that the future is very, very bleak. And I think it's very, very important that one cultivate a certain kind of a politics of hope. And that's very important the way we take our work forward. And in a sense, for that, I was very inspired actually by yesterday's presentation by Yasmin, where I'm sure you'll speak about it now, but the kind of incredible work in very, very difficult circumstances is really one place where your sense of optimism and hope should come from. If Yasmin is there in Indonesia doing the work that she's doing, nobody has the right to give up. That will be one kind of submission on my point. The second point I'd make, particularly in the Indian context, is what I found incredibly moving is 3 days after the Supreme Court judgment, we had a protest called it was called a Day of Rage. It happened in cities around India, as well as in many cities around the world, which supported urban solidarity with this. And during the protest in Delhi, one of our friends narrated a poem by Langston Hughes in Hindi. He said, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Does it run like stinking meat, or does it explode?" And his point is that the conversation on gender and sexuality in the Indian context is poised to explode. Sometimes you have to think of it this way. It puts you in a difficult scenario, but a difficult scenario means that people mobilize and say, we will not take this. It's a sense almost of saying that the more you put people down, the more they will rise up and fight back, And that's the sense you get. And the sense that I get across the board is people are saying this is unacceptable. We can't have this law any further, There's a certain way in which conversations are politicized. People are thinking more about this particular issue. Everybody knows what 377 means. 377 is no more a number in the Indian Penal Code. It stands for a certain politics around gender and sexuality. And that's what has happened in the Indian context. Again, what is our point? Our point is we don't want this particular provision to go. We want Indian society to think differently on questions of gender and sexuality. And that precisely is the dream which is poised to explode.
It's always very intimidating to talk after Arvind, you know. Because while he was talking, I need to say something inspiring, and then I forgot. and imagine how shocked I was when he said that he was inspired by me. It was, so anyway, I was going to, well, talking about a strategy moving forward in Indonesia is that I think the biggest criticism on the LGBT movement in Indonesia is that we are too comfortable working together with our natural allies, the human rights groups, the women's groups, the HIV rights groups. Well, these are, even though these are like prominent groups that are that are really considered by the governments or during policy and so on, but it's only a few of us there. There are only few people. So now, when we got backlash by the hostilities is raising among publics, there's not so many people defending us, actually. So this is the time where I think intersectionality on movement, in the context of movement, is more important than ever. We need to build, we need to go beyond the usual alliance. We need to build strong alliances outside the human rights and women's rights groups, of course. Like the labor movement would be a very make a great ally for us, considering the large scale of the movement. So when but it will take a while. It will take a while to invest on that, because in Indonesia, even the labor movement have, it's a very, very diverse groups as well. Many of them are very conservatives. We have many trade union members who are also members of the Islamic defenders groups. So it will be a long way to go, but I think it's really worth it. It's a great investment for the movement to move beyond the usual alliance. So I think that would be a great strategy, because right now advocating on policy, on law, it becomes harder, because of course when you talk about policy, you talk about the law, the government they will be in favor for the larger number, and the general public, the position of the general public is now against us. So it won't be benefiting for the politician to support us right now. Then, so I think it would be very, we will face maybe like a very dark periods in the future, but that is the time when I think it's right. What Arvind said is right, that it's time for the radicalization of the LGBT movement. Maybe that will unite us and will radicalize the movement itself to really fight back, because we have never been this oppressed before. So I think it will give us time to build our alliance, to rethink about our strategy again, and fight back with a greater power and resources. I think I will leave it to that. Thank you.
Strategies. Okay. I think there's a lot of bad laws has been issued during the past 2 years, like the anti-spy law, the national security law, overseas NGO management law, and charity law. All of those laws are trying to regulate the civil society in China. And the political space is become more and more cramped. So during this context, what can we do? I think the first one is sustain our community. Like those potential allies, we need to fund them and tell them join our movement. The second one is, I think, the dilemma for the Chinese authority is the economic development is a vital importance for this country. So they can't give up. If they give it up, it will be a problem of legitimacy. So they want to sustain their harmonious society. At the same time, they need to keep our economy growth. So the pink economy will be a chance. But I won't say that it's like an army can fight against authority. It's commercial companies in China. It can't be like the NGOs, but they provide a space for LGBT community. And some of them, like Blood, Let's Do, Let's Park, they can provide a space, an online space. Although this online space will have interaction offline. So it is a new thing for LGBT community. It is a chance. But what we can learn from the blind date campaign in Shanghai, blind date corner, that's suppressed by the Shanghai police. I think in their logic, they treat it like picking quarrel and provoking troubles. Yeah, that's just like the crime I got detained. So we need to understand their logic. It doesn't mean it's sensible or feasible. It means we need to, the fact is, the majority of public, they don't have a better understanding about homosexuality. So we need to tell them, we need to trying to do something to make them support us. I think P-flag is a very good strategy, like their parents. Yeah, they are heterosexual, so they support homosexual. It is sensible for the general public. And so we need to, I think we can build some communication routes like the Blood. I think Blood is very good at build the people connections with our authorities. You know, the police, the internet police, have settled in their office. They have maybe apartments in charge of monitoring the live shows of the gay live shows and lesbian live shows. Yeah, I do the live shows on Let's Do. So I know there's some internet police. It will watch my show. So that's very interesting. Yeah, but you know, I'm very political sensitive in my country. Yeah, but I can do the live show on Let's Do. So it is like a space. And we don't know what will happen in the future because it's very uncertain and it's very casual to issue some laws. So I think this is our job and trying to switch, or I think for example, I think the UN mechanism is very vulnerable in China. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I think our authorities is very familiar with those mechanisms. They know how to manipulate the whole process. Yeah, it's very easy for them. Yeah, maybe 10 years ago in 2007, they don't know how to do that, but now they are quite familiar with it, and they didn't obey the law. There's no optional, how to say that? There's yeah, you can't do monitoring. So it's a very isolated country, and use the specific language and build a lot of barriers of information. So for us, only the local community can solve this problem due to the overseas NGO management law. If you keep receiving the foreign fundings, it's illegal. But there's no LGBT community or non-governmental organization can register in China. No one. So it is like that. We can't get any official fundings from our government. At the same time, we can't receive the foreign fundings anymore. So it is like what we can do is root in our domestic context and trying to find some way, like do crowdfunding. You know, the Chinese people, they don't have a awareness to donate their money for LGBT community. They would love to donate for some like diseases, some sort of that. It's very easy for them to understand. So we need to educate our general public. We need to educate the general LGBT community to do something and to support our LGBT rights.
Just going to go back to the Commonwealth theme for a couple of minutes. In the struggle for human rights and equality for LGBTI people, the Commonwealth is one front upon which activists are engaged, one of many. But it does seem to me that there are real entry points to progress equality and human rights for LGBT people on this front. To take at the top line what the Commonwealth, this collection of 52 nations that I've already said 36 of them criminalise homosexuality, say about themselves. Article 2 of the Commonwealth Charter, we are implacably opposed to all forms of discrimination, whether rooted in gender, race, colour, creed, political belief or other grounds. And Article 4, we accept the diversity and understand the richness of our multiple identities and are fundamental to the Commonwealth principles and approach. So taking that as our entry point, the Kaleidoscope Trust is a member of the Commonwealth Equality Network, founded some years ago by activists from Sri Lanka, Tonga and elsewhere in advance of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Sri Lanka, where the entry points around LGBT issues were very few. The range of the network is far and its diversity is significant. It currently has 38 member organisations in 36 countries in all regions of the Commonwealth, from Malta to Tonga, from Nigeria to Jamaica, incorporating mainstream LGBT and trans-Pacific organisations. It's important that I emphasise that Kaleidoscope Trust does not own the network. We do not run the network. We are one of the equal members of the network. Most of the members of the network are based in the Global South, in low and middle income countries, and the network itself is operated by a management committee from all 5 regions. And I think in the third question we'll talk about some of the strategies of activism given global north-south power dynamics and the risk of ongoing colonialism. One of the engagements that we seek to try to do is to put LGBT rights on the agenda when the 52 Prime Ministers and Presidents of the Commonwealth gather in the UK for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in April next year. It is an unprecedented opportunity for LGBT rights, but having this meeting in the UK and putting the issue of LGBT equality on the agenda is undoubtedly complex, and the risks are high, because we've seen in the past that the British approach, and indeed the Western approach to promoting the human rights of LGBT people can be deeply problematic, counterintuitive, and in fact harmful. And I think we'll talk more about aid conditionality. But if done sensitively, by listening to the views and the voices of the activists with whom we cooperate, by putting them at the forefront, there are entry points. The lesson that I would give to Britain, Australia, Canada and others is that yes, we need to see leadership, yes, we need to see diplomacy and greater utilisation of missions, diplomatic posts around the world to engage with and support the local activists. we need more resources. But in fact, there are other voices, stronger voices, that will resonate with Commonwealth countries. In March this year, we hosted a private dialogue with the former presidents of Mozambique, Festus Mogae, the former president of Mozambique, Joaquim Chissano, and the former president of Tanzania, Benjamin Mkapa, to engage with the high commissioners of different African countries, some of which criminalize and many of which are actively hostile to equality for LGBT people, about the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically through the lens of leaving no one behind and the objective of getting a grip on the HIV crisis, which is resurgent in some South African countries. The SDGs provide a very valuable framework and entry point to engage in these discussions, because the research speaks for itself. You cannot tackle HIV crises whilst discriminating against, criminalising and persecuting LGBT people. And whilst all of these countries have subscribed to the objective of tackling the HIV crisis, this is an entry point. The business case also resonated. Mozambique decriminalised, as I mentioned to you, as part of a package of legal reforms. And the former president, Joaquim Chissano, was with us for this dialogue. His reasons for decriminalisation were varied. But one of the reasons that he utilised is that Mozambique wants to increasingly be a hub for tourism in southern Africa and to attract inward investment. And one of the consequences of decriminalisation is they felt that as a country they would be better able to attract that investment. The World Bank estimates that countries that criminalise and allow violence against LGBT people lose £100 billion from global economies every year. The role of business is difficult. We're attuned to the risks of pinkwashing, but a very local and I think impactful example very recently, I would argue, is Pink Dot. And I think that you have activists here from Singapore when the government of Singapore said that foreign companies operating in the country cannot contribute to Pink Dot, foreigners cannot participate in Pink Dot, to see this mobilization of Singaporean businesses, small and large, standing up for equality and LGBT rights and contributing to the initiative seems to me a very good, homegrown and local example of how businesses can be brought into the fold. We hope to continue our dialogues with the leaders of these former countries and other leaders, like, for instance, Prime Minister Muscat of Malta, which, as I say, has led the way on trans and intersex inclusion in the lead up to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting next year. One of the things that we need to try to do is to shift the narrative away from Western countries like Canada, Australia, particularly Australia, and Britain, lecturing countries, hectoring countries about LGBT rights. I firmly believe that we need to see more people standing up for fundamental human rights, for equality for LGBT people, for the protection of refugees at a time of increasing populism and resurgent right-wing movements around the world, even in countries and regions like our own, where those very fundamental principles are increasingly questioned and called into account. But I would urge the governments of Britain, Australia and Canada to leave the platform, to share the platform with others, like President Mogae, President Chissano, Prime Minister Muscat, and the LGBT activists themselves. I think we have a major entry point with the newly appointed UN independent expert on the protection, on discrimination and violence against LGBT people. Arvind is our community expert on this issue and so might want to say more about this. But one of the several issues on which the independent expert is engaged is decriminalisation. He's recently presented his first report to the Human Rights Council in Geneva. Arvind and I were there for that in 2 weeks ago. And going forward, how the independent expert can try to achieve his objective of building bridges, engaging in dialogue with countries that criminalise or allow impunity for LGBT people is going to be a major issue. I think the other theme of work that we want to pursue is sharing of best practice. I've already said that Malta is leading the way on the inclusion of trans and intersex people. Malta has been declared in the Rainbow Index the most LGBTI inclusive country in this region, but there is always more to do. And I think the founding of the Equal Rights Coalition, a new intergovernmental initiative of 35 countries from around the world, most of Europe, Latin America, and some others, which aims to cooperate to strengthen the protection of LGBTI people, provides entry points. Why doesn't the British government and others like Canada sit down at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting with the government of Malta, with Maltese civil society, to learn from, to look at best practice from the trans and intersex initiatives there? And in the same way, we hope that countries could be encouraged to sit down with Mozambique, with Seychelles and others, to learn that decriminalisation is possible, even in regions where virulent homophobia and transphobia exists, but it requires political will and courage, it requires intense engagement with civil society, and it actually requires resources. Decriminalisation is simply not a matter of pulling a page or a paragraph out of the penal code. It is a complex process which requires skills, draftspeople, for instance. And going forward, understanding how decriminalisation has been achieved in Mozambique, Seychelles and elsewhere will help other countries understand that reform is possible and what those routes might be.
Thank you so much. So I think Paul has mentioned the conditionality debate, and I would like to the last question could be around that. So if, I don't know if the audience is aware, in 2012, David Cameron had made a remark saying that they are going to put a conditionality on foreign aid by the UK, depending upon the country's laws for LGBT people, and then a bunch of activists from Africa wrote a letter, an open letter, saying that this is actually going to increase homophobia and attacks on LGBT people, because anyways the communities are hostile, and if they see that foreign aid is not coming into the country because of LGBT people, then the attacks might increase instead of the laws becoming favorable. And in 2014, World Bank delayed a $2 billion loan to Uganda because of the introduction of anti-homosexuality laws. But in the case of World Bank, it was interesting to see that 5 activists, LGBT activists from all over the world, had actually written to the World Bank asking them to delay the loan, precisely because they felt that if they had given the loan, this would lead to further discrimination, because there was an existing law against LGBT people, and if they gave that aid, it wouldn't actually reach those people. But then there were also counter arguments by activists in Africa who argued that this should not have been done. So I was just wondering if all of us at the panel would want to throw in and give your opinions on this debate. And as Paul said, that whether it should not be, not even have like a black and white opinion in terms of it should be done or not be done, but if it has to be done, then what kind of ways can this debate be negotiated?
Yeah, no, a very simple answer to that question is, I guess you should be led by activists at the ground level in terms of what people think works as far as strategies going forward are concerned. And very clearly the idea of unilateral coercive measures, trade sanctions, etc. have been seen as hugely problematic by activists in very, very difficult contexts. And the point is simply this: if you're Ugandan and you're part of that particular society, and surely you don't want people within your own society saying that you're responsible for betraying the country or putting the country in a bad situation, etc., etc. So obviously, I think there's a consensus on the point that this cannot be the way forward. Clearly cannot be the way forward. You can't come in from outside without taking into account the considerations at the ground level and what people want, what people think is useful in the activism going forward. And perhaps the only point I'd really add would be in taking up again from where Paul left off, is what is the work one can do at the international level which can be meaningful as far as domestic level activists are concerned, which is where the role of the independent expert comes in, where you have in place and established a mechanism which can or cannot be activated by activists depending upon their need or depending upon their analysis, And that's why I feel the independent expert is a very useful mechanism, where you have something in place which, if you decide that the context in your country of violation deserves or needs an international spotlight, it's possible to do that using the mechanism of the independent expert. So there are ways in which we should think of how international law can help in a domestic context without being an imposition. And I think that's a very, very important thing. And how people are able to draw upon international resources without feeling that they're being coerced by the international mechanisms.
Well, it's a very, I think it's a tricky thing about international supports or towards LGBT community, because in Indonesia our biggest threat is coming from the Islamic fundamentalist group, and any condemnation from the Western world on the situation in Indonesia will be utilized by this group, saying that, see, that's the Western agenda, trying to make us into an LGBT nation. And the foreign aid. Well, we are not really relying much on the foreign aid from. Especially from the British, and it's very easy for the government to get loans from the Chinese government, and that doesn't have a lot of conditions in the contracts. So it's not a very it's not even important. So and now few months ago, the intelligence body had a meeting with donors organizations, foreign donors organizations, and they specifically said that you cannot give support for LGBT movements, or otherwise you cannot operate here. That's very difficult for. That's why the UNDP project on being LGBT in Asia they need to shut down the project and stuff, because that is a strong message from the intelligence body. So both the ultra-nationalist people and the fundamentalist Muslims they're happy whenever the Western world condemns about the situation in Indonesia. They say, see, that's the Western agenda, and these people are just because they undermine our nation, they undermine our sovereignty. They want us to become weaker by making us homosexuals, making us a very weak nation, so they can occupy it at the later time. It's a crazy notions, but hey, this is a country this is one of the country with the worst education system in the world. So that's even crazy things like that are sensible. Sound sensible for many of people in Indonesia. So yeah.
I think there's a lot of country learn from China a lot. Yeah. So at the beginning, it was Russia, about the foreign fundings, the restriction, and then the Egypt, India,
Bangladesh,
China, and a lot of countries. So and the foreign power become a very popular word in China. So all of the social media have been contaminated by those words. Like when we talk about something, it must used by the foreign power. So will lead China become a very closed country. So sometimes I think about what the Western country can contribute to improve the LGBT situation in China. I think it's very restricted in the future. So that's the reason why I have to change my strategies, and I need to base on the domestic situation, and I need to raise the money from the domestic public. So But I think the public attention is always very important. And there's a lot of international students study abroad, and they need to keep updated. And when they return to China, they can contribute to not just the LGBT movement, also the human rights movement. And also, I think except for the public attention, I think there's a lot of international non-governmental organizations or the big foundations. They have to change their strategy. They have to be more flexibility. That is the key to solve the problem. If you insist on, you need to sign the contract with me, obviously it's illegal. If this is, you broke the law. So you can't register in China. So it is a dilemma for those international NGOs also. So that's I think we need to switch. We need the flexibility, yeah.
In the last few years, we've seen two moments in British foreign policy in relation to LGBT rights that have been very problematic. The first were calls, including widespread calls within British, the public and LGBT community for the boycott of the Sochi Games in Russia, particularly targeting President Putin and the country's propaganda laws in relation to LGBT people. And of course, famously, David Cameron's threat to cut aid to Uganda in light of the anti-homosexuality bill. And in both occasions, it seems to me that the views and the voices of the local activists were not being given the priority that they always should be. And that includes NGOs like ours and others educating and talking to the public about why we understand that you feel that this might be a good strategy, but it will be harmful and it will be counterproductive. I think the one resource that I would encourage you to look at in this respect is the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Global LGBT Rights first inquiry, the report published as a result of that on how Britain can approach the issue of the global equality and LGBT rights for LGBT people, looking at a range of issues, how we engage with diplomacy, how foreign missions can best support LGBT activists, the provision of resources, the role of businesses abroad, the protection of refugees at home, and how our domestic record in showing that we actually practice what we preach. I think that development should be on the table, but the question that we're framing around cutting aid is the wrong question. We've seen that as far as I can see, is generally very harmful, and in fact, to some countries it doesn't apply because we don't give aid anyway. I've mentioned my frustration at the lack of resources that are available for Southern activists. The Foreign Office is not where the money lives. The money lives in the British Department of International Development. And trying to queer that government department, trying to help them understand how that they can best contribute to the protection of LGBT rights so that money starts flowing, I think is an important issue. And colleagues of mine, of ours in the UK Alliance for Global Equality, a civil society coalition of NGOs devoted to the issue of international LGBT rights, including Stonewall, Human Dignity Trust, and others, I think that will be one of the key issues going forward. And it's these strategies and these potential pitfalls that the British government is going to need to understand in the lead up to CHOGM and thereafter if it wants to achieve the best possible outcomes for the activists who are part of our network.
Thank you. I think we are now going to play a short video message sent by the Special Rapporteur on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity. We had invited him for the conference, but he couldn't make it, but he was very sweet to send a video message for us.
Asia Conference. House in warm greetings to everyone at the Queer Asia Conference, housed in SOAS, United Kingdom. Very important conference.
Is that the message?
Hello everyone. I'm scientific Montessori, university professor who is now helping as UN independent expert on the issue of protection against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in your very important conference. Even though I'm not able to be there physically, I am there with you spiritually. And to recognize, very importantly, that your conference, your dialogue is very, very important to help promote human rights, covering everyone, as well as protection of everyone, particularly in relation to SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity. So many congratulations. Secondly, I'd like to thank very, very much governments, international organizations, civil society, individuals and communities, very, very strongly and very warmly for the great commitment to promote and protect human rights, particularly in regard to sexual orientation and gender identity. Your role, your cooperation, both are very, very important in terms of advancing the agenda to leave no one behind in sustainable development terms, as well as to engage with, promote respect for, ensure compliance with international rights standards. So many congratulations and a big thank you to all of you very important stakeholders, particularly at the national and local level, for your inputs. I'm a humble volunteer and you're the experts, so I'm fully supportive of your initiatives and efforts, particularly within the country and within the locality. Bear in mind that there are international implications for what you do at the local level, for the global level. Thirdly, let me just tell you a little bit about the work that I'm undertaking. I'm just a simple volunteer helping pro bono, appointed by the UN. And it's an enormous pleasure and true honor to help you, to help advance the agenda to cover everyone on the basis of non-discrimination and respect for the human rights of all. Under the mandate, which is to do with protection against violence and discrimination on the basis of SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity, I am requested by the United Nations Human Rights Council to prepare 2 global reports a year on the situation, to undertake country missions, and the first country I visited very recently was Argentina, which has a very enlightening law on gender recognition, gender identity recognition, to enable people to have their self-identity recognized in terms of gender, very importantly, as well as challenges of implementation. So I'll be undertaking more country visits along the way, and I welcome possibilities to link up. Thirdly, in addition to global reports and country visits, I also take communications, complaints in regard to violations. And even though this is not a judicial position, it is a position that advocates on behalf of victims, survivors, stakeholders particularly, very importantly from the local level. So I look forward to support a variety of measures to promote, ensure, improve protection of human rights worldwide, and more particularly in your communities. So with those initial entry points, let me finally congratulate you, wish you all the best with your very important dialogue, and look forward to listening to you in terms of your conclusions and recommendations, which will be very important inputs for the global reports as well as, where relevant, the country reports under the mandate. Together, under the umbrella of the United Nations, we will work for the betterment of that protection for all. And thank you very much for your kind cooperation, and I wish you very, very much all the best for your activities, and encourage you to work harder, with great spirit to protect all on the basis of human rights for all. Thank you very much.
I would like now to take questions from the audience. Anybody? Yes, one here, one there. So I'll take 3, beginning from there.
Hi, Matthew Waits from University of Glasgow. Thank you very much to everyone on the panel for some really interesting comments. particularly in relation to the comments from Arvind and from Paul. I just want to sort of make the general comment that I think what we really need in LGBT activism is a sort of shift in approach to how we think about decolonization, where the emphasis has been very much on decolonization, but decolonization of law. And I think we need a whole sort of emphasis in our conversations on a wider understanding of the ongoing effects of colonialism in shaping global power relations as they exist now, particularly in economic terms, and then always to be thinking about what the implications of that are for representation when we're constituting panels, when we're formulating strategies and so on. So, and I do think that that is emergent very much in the kind of work that Paul's doing. Yeah, but I think it's good to sort of voice it. In terms of apologies and Arvind's suggestion for an apology, it seems like that might be one possible strategy on the table for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in April next year, which is going to be in London. I think the thing there is, from an analytical point of view, it's the way that even when actions are very well intentioned, the way they're received can often be overdetermined by wider structural contexts. And I think what we're going to see is that the CHOGM, the London CHOGM, is going to be used, if we still have a Conservative government, by Theresa May and Boris Johnson, to very much in the context of Brexit, as an opportunity to try and remobilise the Commonwealth for a neoliberal business agenda. So the danger is that any apology made in that context, whatever its intentions, may be received in a different way. So I was very pleased to hear Paul emphasising the importance of Southern representation and the engagements of Paul with former presidents from Mozambique, for example. And I think my comment that I'd ask you to sort of comment on would be about the need for North-South partnerships or South-North partnerships to be really visible. So if there's going to be an apology or any move at the CHOGM, what we need is a panel of people from South and North speaking together. And what we don't need, as Paul said, is leaders from the North taking the stage to make an apology alone.
Yeah, you had
Hi, I'm Sarah Hall. I work at Stonewall. So my question would be relating to the role of the private sector, which has come up in some of your contributions. And I wonder if we can elaborate a little bit more what the possibilities would be for the private sector to play the role of an ally. Just for a little bit of background, my colleagues at Stonewall work with employers to become LGBT inclusive. It started out in the UK, to make the UK workplace more LGBT inclusive, but obviously quite a lot of UK-based companies are global companies, so with a global reach. And while we see, I guess, quite welcoming rhetoric also from quite a few global companies of becoming LGBT inclusive employers and also possibly advancing the LGBT rights agenda more broadly, I'm not yet aware of a lot of, some kind of good blueprint or good models of how that can actually really translate into concrete support at the national level. So if you have any more thoughts on this, I would be really keen to hear them. And I should also flag that the UN Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights is shortly due to publish UN guidance on business tackling LGBT discrimination. And these guidance, I think they're called corporate standards of conduct will go beyond the role of business to just be an inclusive employer. So yeah, just any more thoughts on this? I'd be really keen to hear that.
There, excuse me. Can we go there and then come back?
Thank you for selecting me. So I had a question on strategies. And for those activists working to decriminalize homosexuality or increase protection, do you think it's important to focus more on legal and political reform first, or social reform, changing people's minds? Obviously, it's good to have both at the same time, but one is to prioritize resources. And it's a bit of a chicken and egg. Without legal and political reform, you don't have the legal framework for change, to campaign for change, and without social reform, you don't have backing. So I don't know which you think is more important. Some have pointed at India's case, for example, of the recriminalization as an example of what happens when legal and political reform runs too far ahead of social change. So I'm interested to see what you have to say.
Last question before we open.
Just a very quick comment. I know time is very tight. In response to Paul, that's exactly what's the scary thing about what Pink Dot is doing. With the event itself and the sponsorship, it's becoming a case study, and it's cited in panels like this. Everybody is going to point to Singapore and say, they can do it. Why can't we? So we are going to block foreign investment in local politics and rights campaigns, and that is what I'm resisting, and that is what I'm very cautious of. If you read between the lines and what's happening in the sponsorship from local companies in Singapore, it was possible, but honestly, if you look at the companies and who owns those entities, a lot of them are already affiliated with Pink Dot as an organization itself, or are sponsoring in kind. And it's a symbolic gesture on the government's part, but it's also a symbolic response from the community's part to assemble this 112 companies to form like a facade of resistance. And I'm just wondering whether there can be other alternatives of, should it have been compliance? Because as so far, the entire Pink Dot event and the response from the activists in Singapore has been one of absolute obedience and compliance, and always playing in response to what the government is saying or stating. And when is the point when we say enough is enough and we are not going to comply anymore and we're going to stop Pink Dot? Because this form of compliance is not sustainable in the long term. Second quick comment, Paul gestures to listening to local activists. And what if the local activists do not represent the variety of voices of their constituency? Because in order to emerge as a local activist in countries that are highly repressive and oppressive, it takes a sort of character. And sometimes it can be quite aggressive. And just putting that on the table, and how would you reconcile the fact that some of these activists do not represent their constituency and have their personal agenda?
I think I'll let the panelists respond to these 4 questions for now.
Thanks, Matthew, for those really thoughtful comments. I agree with you that when we think of decolonization, we must think of colonialism as a wider phenomenon than just the legal framework alone. And that's very, very important. Also because part of the way the right wing has functioned at the international level is to play on this point that economic colonization and imperialism is something which is opposed to LGBT rights. So it's something which I think as people who are advocating for LGBT rights, it's very, very important to have a sense that there's an economic dimension as well to colonialism and a continuing sense of marginalization of countries on the basis of what you can call neo-colonialism. So that's an important framework to adopt. And thinking very, very specifically of the question of apology, I think it plays out there as well. Because the question of apology is not being raised for the first time by LGBT activists. In the context of slavery, it's been raised again and again. And Britain has refused to apologize for that, right? So how do we even think of our apology demand in an intersectional way? I think that's a very, very important concern, and that should be taken on board in going forward. Because otherwise you can have the situation where, I mean, it's potentially possible that the British government may apologize for this particular law. But will they ever apologize for slavery? That's a question, of course, which is always there in the background. So how do we think of this and in a more complicated way, and how do we take this forward is a question I think we need to, I'll say, think a little more about. The question on the private sector, I would imagine that the key thing, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's true that in the Indian context, it's the multinational corporations which have put in place anti-discrimination or diversity policies. And one hopes that through that, there's a wider impact on other companies as well. People take that as a model and they take that line of thinking forward. That being said, there are clear limitations to what companies can do and are willing to do. Because I mean, our sense again is if you tell a company in India that there's a criminal law, they just back down. The only way forward then is to tell the company that what the law criminalizes. I mean, to take a counter argument. You make the argument that what the law criminalizes is certain sexual acts. It doesn't criminalize you forming an association. It doesn't criminalize you having, for example, an anti-discrimination framework in your place. And then we need to tell companies, show some backbone and spine. Well, guys claim to be leaders. Show some leadership on this point. Don't be scared because you think the law criminalizes. So I think companies, we have to think in a way of, they claim to be leaders. I don't think they're leaders in many aspects. In some ways, we need to push them, we need to work with them, but we need to make them clearly more sensitive to this particular dimension, this particular issue. On the question of legal and political change, again, thank you. That's really a fantastic question. And it's a question, of course, as I said, chicken and the egg. We've all talked about it endlessly. Give you an illustration from the Indian context. The Delhi High Court judgment in 2009 was ahead of its time. But what we think it did is it enabled a certain change, a certain openness in Indian society to questions around gender and sexuality. Give you one example. In 2009, post the judgment, in 2000, when the case came up before the Supreme Court, we had a petition filed by 19 parents of LGBT persons. That would not have happened without the Delhi High Court judgment, which set in place a certain kind of discourse of rationality, reason, and dignity on LGBTI rights, right? Till then, when you say LGBT, as Justice Shah, who was a judge in the Delhi High Court, described it, the way you talk about it is with a snigger and a smirk, you know. What the Delhi High Court judgment did is we look at these as decisions about people's intimate lives. If you decide who you want to be with, that's a part of an intimate decision. It's part of who you are. It's part of personhood. Suddenly, people started looking at this with a sense of respect, you know, and that changed the way society even begins to view LGBT people. So that's a way where the law led in change. And again, was 2013 was a question of the law going ahead of its time. The point is, the law changes societal conversation. That's the important thing. So sometimes legal victories can lead the way forward. Sometimes legal defeats can also be ways in which you can change the conversation in society. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Damn it. I would like to respond on respond about aligning with employers. I think it's a very it's also something that we've been talking back home. I met with several representatives from the EU and the US embassies at home, and the current administration in Indonesia is very focusing on economic development, and that's where I think that encouragement from the business sectors would be more considered rather than the UN, the EU, rather than human rights perspective, human rights mechanism. So I think it is something that we have thought about but have not really worked on. So I guess that is another homework to be done when in the couple of years ahead. And apart from allying with the workers' movement itself. And I would also like to respond on the legal reform. Actually, Indonesia this is, I think, ironic. We used to be under an authoritarian regime, but it was pretty safe for LGBT people to live back then. Because this regime, they crack down everyone. They crack down the the democratic movement, they crack down the leftist movement, but they also crack down the fundamentalist movement. So it was pretty safe during being LGBT back then. And then we had a transitional period to democracy. We had a legal reform, political reform, and now we have a broader public participation in the decision-making process. And the most people who are making use of this opportunity is not only those who are working on democracy, but these people, the fundamentalist groups, also using the same channels. And now it is very ironic that when we have relatively, when we are now when we are a relatively democratic country, oppression are even higher towards not only LGBT groups, but also to freedom of expression, to a lot of things. For democratic movements are being oppressed in the democratic regime and under a civilian administration. So I don't know. I think what we need is a really cultural reform, and education is important for the people. Understanding human rights values is important for the people. To include a lot of democratic principles and values into our education is important. We need to change the behavior. Then we can have other progress.
Okay, I'll keep it short. Yeah, there are several attempts to gain the support from the international companies. The first one is domestic fundraising, donate the money directly to the non-governmental organization. And there's a lot of attempts. They are trying to do galas, fundraising galas, and there's a lot of foreigners. They would love to help to be the ambassadors. Yeah, help them to raise money, and also have the cooperation with different embassies. The embassies, they have small grants every year, and also they can do some videos to raise the visibility of LGBT community. And the third one is Shanghai Pride. It's like a gay pride, the only one in China. They got the permission from the police. The police permit them to host it once a year. So now it is the time they do. Today is the open day for LGBT organizations. They have their banners and materials in the Shanghai Pride. It's like a celebrity party, so it's okay. This also have a problem of decriminalize the LGBT movement. And the third one, the first one is like the tourism, group tourism. Travel on the sea and travel to the South Korea. The P flag is on their journey on the sea to the South Korea. It's like group tourism, but it's also a very huge party for P flag for LGBT communities. Yeah.
I think I'll start with this question first around what do you prioritize, legal reform or engaging with the public more widely. I think the example that I'd use, just because we're in London, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. If you look at the history of 1967 to now, I think, yes, we have near total legislative equality, but there are still important areas in trans rights, and not least the intersex movement. We haven't even begun to get a grip on equality and inclusion for intersex people in this country in the way that we should have. So I just can't see that the two are mutually inclusive. I think the issue that we always come back to is resources. And many of the activists who are part of the Commonwealth Equality Network have to make tough choices about what it is that they concentrate on with the little resources that are available. That speaks to the much wider global problem of resources for the LGBTI movement and getting money to the global south, particularly in the context of decreasing civil society space and restrictive laws, as we were just talking about. Matthew's point on our approach to advocacy, it's essential. It's something that we're dealing with every day in terms of understanding the best possible and ethical contribution that we can make as global northern activists. Yes, we're two people in a room in Dalston, but our resources are significantly more prevalent than some of our partners. And yes, we're based in London, and we can get access to the media very quickly and whatever the case might be. So I think Matthew's collection of essays, Human Rights, Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity in the Commonwealth is essential reading, as some of your writing on the critiques of organisations around the table, essential reading. On the point of listening to activists, I would offer a slightly different answer. I wouldn't say we just listen to activists. Our work is directed by the activists. The management committee of the Commonwealth Equality Network is Southern-led, and they decide the strategy and the approaches that we pursue. I think the wider question is who speaks for the LGBT community and who speaks for civil society. I'm here representing the Kaleidoscope Trust. In the UK, we've formulated the UK Alliance for Global Equality so that we can try to be more organised and cohesive and coherent in presenting a unified message on behalf of civil society on these issues. But I think an interesting example is the work around the independent experts, the creation of his mandate and the protection of his mandate when it was under threat at the UN General Assembly last year. Because 600 organisations and NGOs in more than 150 countries signed petitions twice to urge the UN, organised by Arvind and his colleagues at ARC and others, to protect this mandate and to create this vital mechanism for the protection of the human rights of LGBT people. But it's absolutely right to say that there were activists within the movement and organisations that weren't so keen on having this mechanism, particularly from the perspective of intersectionality, that is the Special Rapporteur on access to health, education, freedom of religion, going to increase their intersectional analysis and inclusion of LGBT people, or will the LGBT mandate will stop that in train? So there was this schism within the LGBT movement, and how you navigate that when there are different voices is very difficult. So in Malta, for instance, where there's a very small LGBT community and there's one cohesive, very organised NGO and voice, it's much, much easier than in a country like India, where a vibrant civil society community, where there will be differences of opinions. And so the answer to that question, there is none. There is no real answer. What do you do as a person in an LGBT community where you don't subscribe to the mission of the registered NGO? I would, well, as a cisgender Y in the global north, I would say, well, organised and offer your perspective. But that's a really tough one, and that's an issue that we're going to deal with the Commonwealth Equality Network going forward as the membership expands, and as other NGOs will want to join the network and offer different perspectives on how we take that forward. Ultimately, it'll be for a member. It will be for the network members as a whole to decide how we deal with that issue.
I'm afraid I'll not be able to take any more questions, but our panelists are around, so you can talk to them. I would really like to thank Ben Hobel, LLP, for sponsoring our panel. And right now, in this venue, we have a panel on migration and diaspora, and in the KLT downstairs, we have a panel on literature. We have around 2 more academic panels following this, after which we have a panel on feminist activism in China, a talk with Nadia Lali on queer feminist activism in West Asia, a talk with advocate Geeta Luthra from India, and a Hong Kong activist on intersex issues in the law, and the photo exhibition in UCL, followed by a talk on life under 377 in India, and a wine reception at 5:30 in the UCL. So that's our lineup for today. The schedule is outside, so please go grab a copy. Thank you, everyone.